Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year. This is our first 2019 Ask Me Anything call. We have done these every month since I've been the treasurer, and obviously you can ask me anything, but just a couple of things have happened since our last call is that we've announced a fee holiday. What that means is that in addition to the pension plan that you've heard so much about over the years, we also have responsibility for the defined contribution, otherwise known as 401, 403, or 457 plans. Those plans amount to about $12 billion in assets. One of the plans has the highest number of enrollees of anybody in the country, not money, but just enrollees. And this is obviously available to state as well as local workers like city, county, and otherwise. The fee holiday is the result of the fact that the administrative fee is charged as a percentage of the assets under management. So as the stock market went up last year, the fees went up. And this has happened one other time in North Carolina history. In the previous instance, I believe really tiny checks, for the most part, were refunded back to all the plan members, maybe over 100,000 of those little tiny checks. I felt like that was an administrative burden. Actually, just to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, some of those checks actually ended up back at the Escheats division of the treasurer's office because people didn't cash them. So
here, according to a new report out today, NPR's Jeff Brumfield has more on what's behind the rise. The report by an independent consultant.
Sounds like we've got somebody's radio signal coming through. Would y'all mind hitting mute on your ends? Thank you.
So what we've announced for this year is a fee holiday where the administrative fee is not going to be charged. That results in a savings of $2 million to plan participants this year. So with that, Stephanie, we'll start with our questions.
Okay, who's got a question for Treasurer Folwell this morning?
Well, I have a question. This is Dan Way.
Go ahead, Dan.
Again, reports about the severity of the underfunded nature of the state health plan. And although you've made this an issue for a long time, when you see a report come out that compares us to, being in the neighborhood of somebody like Illinois, who is notorious for having underfunded plans, not a good look for North Carolina. Now, I know you've inherited the situation, but I'm wondering what, if anything, you're going to be pushing for in this upcoming legislative session, and if you're hearing anything from any of the lawmakers about whether they have any intention to try and shore up the gap there.
Well, number one, thank you for your question, Dan. Last year, the General Assembly approved the Solvency Fund, which for the first time in North Carolina history, we now have a mechanism for when if somebody wanted to appropriate money to the Solvency Fund. The Solvency Fund is not only for the unfundedness of the health plan, but also the unfunded pension plan. I'll go back to healthcare briefly, but just to let the listeners know, in the year that just ended, we paid out on a gross basis over $6 billion in pension benefits. Our earnings were negative. So the unfundedness of the pension plan grew by several billions of dollars last year in addition. But going back to the health plan, the General Assembly has approved the Solvency Fund, which gives us a mechanism, an account, so to speak, so that when we have reserve balances or the General Assembly wants to appropriate money to this, let's say the rainy day fund gets refilled, they have another place to put money. So, but over the long term, the answer to the unfunded liability in North Carolina is what we're doing with reference-based pricing and the cost of things. Because the unfunded liability is the result of statisticians and actuaries calculating how much healthcare costs are going to be and how much they're going to be going up over the next 40 years for state employees and retirees. So a lot of this is connected with the reference-based pricing. So the second thing I'll say to your question, Dan, is that this is the biggest part of any budget, whether it's the governor's budget, agriculture commissioner's budget, or whomever's budget. is the fact that the state health plan spends more money than it gets appropriated to the entire university system or entire justice and public safety system of North Carolina. What we're trying to prevent, which is happening in every other state, is that money is being pulled away from things that people do wake up in the morning thinking about, which is how to educate our kids and protect ourselves from criminals and pave our roads and all the other functions. Money's being pulled away from all of those things in order to fund the healthcare liabilities. This is a major issue, and our approach to solving it is very simple. We are all about increasing transparency. We're all about lowering costs, and we're all about pushing the power away from us and putting the tools and the power in the hands of the consumer. We had a teacher who emailed me right before Thanksgiving and was ordered to get an echocardiogram. And I want to say that something I've never said on this call before. The most powerful thing in medicine these days is not a stethoscope. It is not an x-ray machine. It is not a scalpel. The most powerful thing in medicine right now is a ballpoint pen and the ability for doctors to write prescriptions for drugs and write referrals of where somebody else needs to go for medical services. How's that relate to this teacher who wrote me before Thanksgiving? This person was given an order to get an echocardiogram. They got referred into an in-house place to get the echocardiogram. When they got to that place, they were asked for $1,200 up front. When they asked the question, how much is this going to cost? The person said, we can't tell you how much it's going to cost. We just need $1,200 now. So what happened was this individual took that negative experience and spent the next 4 days and got an echocardiogram for less than $250 and only drove 30 miles from their house. My point of saying this to you is that 2 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, there's a major expose about what's going on in healthcare and how referrals of in-house healthcare is driving up the cost. So to put a bow on your question, Dan, by focusing on transparency, by focusing on lower cost, and by focusing on pushing the power down to the consumer, which by the way exists in every other aspect of their life, by doing all that, we think that we can make a dramatic impact on this unfunded liability that North Carolina faces. And you're exactly right. According to Meritus, according to Pew, according to Standard & Poor's, our unfunded liability puts us right behind Illinois. And the reason is it's mathematical. For nearly 40 years, promises were made for state employees and retirees to be eligible for health care, but no money was ever put into reserve for that purpose.
Thank you, Dan. Do we have another question this morning?
We do. This is Alex Olgan. I'm at the NPR affiliate in Charlotte, WFE. And I have a question for you about the reference-based pricing changes that are going on. I know that physicians and other kinds of medical professionals did get the initial letter asking them to sort of give input, and I'm wondering sort of where we stand process-wise with how that's going.
Thank you for joining us. Great question. Look forward to meeting you sometime when I'm in the Charlotte area. Number one is that we relied on Blue Cross Blue Shield to send out those letters. There are over 61,000 providers of health care in North Carolina, the state health plan. But when you narrow it all down to what groups they're members of, it comes down to about 16,000 actual letters that went out. Now, number one, several thousand of those letters came back as being undelivered, which is a curiosity to me because generally speaking, you can't get health care services in North Carolina unless you go to a physical location, generally speaking. So the fact that we have providers out there that they can't get a piece of mail is kind of interesting. So we're scrubbing that. B, tell me your first name again.
This is Alex.
Alex. So secondly, Alex, we got several thousand inquiries back into our portal as a result of sending out that letter. of people who wanted to know more. C, what we're doing now, process-wise, Alex, is we're in the final innings of developing our contract, because there are thousands of healthcare providers in North Carolina that are going to be getting a pay increase as a result of this plan.
But the letters didn't specify it. Do I understand that correctly?
Right.
Okay.
So the pay increases, especially for primary care doctors and behavioral health specialists, some of the pay, I'm not saying all of them are getting pay increases, but we're hearing of thousands and thousands of cases where the pay increases are going to be somewhere between 5 and 50%. Why should that matter to you in relation to your question? Because we think the long-term success of healthcare in North Carolina is going to be based on independent physicians, independent behavioral health specialists, and actually independent hospitals who are able to figure out how to provide the highest value, lowest cost product to any of their customers. And in the case of these thousands of folks, the reason that they're going to be getting pay increases is that they've been underpaid as a relation to these reimbursement strategies in the past. And we want to change that. As I said earlier, the most powerful thing in medicine right now is not a scalpel and it's not an MRI machine. It's a ballpoint pen. And we want doctors to have the independence to refer their patients to the highest quality, lowest cost place. And by rewarding them financially, not for the referrals, which is the basis of the Wall Street Journal article, Alex, but rewarding them financially so that they can remain independent, we think is very important to the long-term success of healthcare delivery in this state.
One follow-up, if I may. When will providers find out about increases like behavioral health and independent primary care? I'm asking because I was talking to a couple in particular.
Well, a lot of them already know, and once again, as I said earlier, that some of the letters, we're working through the database. A lot of letters came back to us, and some of these providers. The reason I can't say all primary care, and the reason I can't say all behavioral health specialists is that, some providers in the state health plan are charging us 7, 8, and 900% of Medicare reimbursement rates currently. And I can't, zero in on every single provider, but we are working with the North Carolina Medical Society, which is where most of these doctors come through, to make sure that we get that information to them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Do we have another question this morning? Nope. Anybody else on the call have a question for the treasurer this morning?
If no one else does, I have a couple more, but I don't want to take any time from other people.
Sure, go right ahead.
So I understand that independent primary care and many behavioral health providers will see increases, and you made a special emphasis on independent. I understand why. I'm wondering what you think the long-term market impacts will be, since the state health plan, covers a large number of about a tenth of the population of the state. Do you think that it will have enough power to shift market dynamics between hospitals and independent doctors?
Well, number one, and it's the reason I'm using this one word is that I used to stutter, so I have a hard time pronouncing the other word. But, we're not out here evangelizing on how to fix healthcare for the whole state, or for the country for that matter, or the world. We're trying to pay attention to what we have the responsibility for, which is the active and retired state employees. The reason I say that is that, all of these providers have choices to make. What we do know is that the pressure being put on independent primary care physicians to come under the umbrella of a huge medical conglomerate is very high. Many of these independent doctors pay property taxes, pay sales taxes, pay income taxes. So then a nonprofit comes in and offers them this big price for their doctor practices that don't include any of that cost structure. And with the challenges facing medicine going forward, you can see in the reimbursement rates, you can see how difficult that is. We don't want to be a part of the negative reimbursement rates that are going on with primary care physicians and behavioral specialists, because their number one goal, and I've said this publicly and I'll say it this morning, is to keep people out of hospitals. That should be all of our goal, is to literally keep people out of hospitals. And there's no one that has that responsibility more than primary care and behavior and mental health specialists across North Carolina.
And I know that the NCHA is not happy, and some of the bigger hospitals are not happy because their rates will go down. Are you expecting a big fight this legislative session from them?
Well, I can't control what people do. I can just control how we react to it. What they have shown so far is they attack people, not problems. Our strategy at the state health plan is that we attack problems. And the problem is that we have beginning teachers and beginning troopers within 10 miles of where you're sitting right now in Charlotte, even as high paid as some of the even with the pay scale that occurs in some of the urban districts, who cannot afford the family premium on the largest purchaser of health care in North Carolina. That is unacceptable. People who educate your kids and protect you from criminals and pave your roads ought to be a part of a health plan, especially when it's the largest purchaser of that product in North Carolina, so that allows them to insure their families, period. Secondly, and what I've said, some of the folks that you previously mentioned, I would challenge you to ask them what their reimbursement rates are currently. That would be a great question from a reporter, because everybody's complaining about what our reimbursement rates are, but I would be really interested in what their answer is as to what they're charging us currently. It's a great question. Let me give you some framework. The workers' compensation reimbursement rates in North Carolina, and have been for years, which is an agreement between the doctors and the hospitals and the workers' compensation group, that reimbursement rate is 140. When a prisoner needs medical services today and they have to go to a medical provider, those reimbursements are 140. When the new My Choice product is being offered by Blue Cross Blue Shield, those reimbursement rates are 140. On average, our reimbursement rates are 177. So if someone is not willing to provide health care services to people who educate their kids, protect them from criminals, and pave their roads and all the other core functions at what is generally considered to be cost, which is Medicare reimbursement, plus on average a 77% profit on top of that, then shame on them.
And I'll leave you with a last question for me. Have you been talking to Montana at all? I know they've done something similar to this.
We love Montana. We know that Montana exists as a state, and we were probably 6 months into this process before we realized that Montana was doing what they were doing and had done what they'd done. That's not a good, don't quote me on, that's not a good sentence structure, but.
That's okay. I mean, maybe have you talked to Marilyn Bartlett? I know she was the one that.
Yeah, we have, but we didn't, when we started down this road, and let me just tell you, and all the people on the call, this started last summer. This started last summer in our conference room downstairs with about 40 people present, hospitals, teachers associations, state employees association, legislative physical research staff, Blue Cross Blue Shield, first responders, doctors, organizations, behavioral health specialists, independent doctors. This started last summer when we met with all of those people at one time, and I started with the rhetorical question, how much waste, fraud, and abuse do you think there is in the system? Now, I asked the question knowing that I had the U.S. Institute of Medicine's report sitting in front of me that answers this question, but I was interested in what people in North Carolina felt about that, the actual experts. And the ranges that came back to me from both the Hospital Association or Blue Cross Blue Shield or maybe even the medical society, was somewhere between 12 and 25%. Well, we were only looking for about 15% savings. So when the providers say there's between 12 and 25% waste, fraud, and abuse out there, our directive to them was go find that and come back to us and tell us how we can operationalize it so we can get these savings. And we're done here. We're finished. We got no suggestions on actually how to cut the waste, fraud, and abuse. What's interesting is that this state health plan is looking for $300 million worth of savings. UNC Healthcare, just one of the providers of this plan, which makes up less than 10% of the cost, had their own initiative last year or 2 years ago that saved $300 million internally. So that's just one provider internally. So we did all this and we got no suggestions back. That's when we started working on reference-based pricing, and that's when we ended up talking to the people in Montana. I also want to direct you to another report that was just sent from the U.S. Treasury Secretary, the U.S. Labor Secretary, the DHHS Secretary, a 118-page report sent to President Trump outlining these issues about surprise billing, about transparency, about competition, about anti-steerage, about anti-competitive cost structures. This report was just sent to the President of the United States over the last 2 weeks. It talks about all the issues that we've been trying to address in the state health plan over the last 18 months.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll check it out.
I want to add one more thing before we go to the next question, Stephanie. You would be shocked to know that when you think about the stimuli that comes into this office, either through a phone call or an email or by the postal service, when you think about that, you'd be shocked to know that most of the stimuli that we're getting into this office right now about how to really fix this system for the state health plan is coming from medical providers who themselves are sick and tired of doing this. That's not what they signed up for when they were decided to go in the healthcare business. They didn't sign up for this. They want to practice medicine and help people. And some of these folks that are sending letters and things in here, they're not bashful about the things they're saying, the things that we need to fix. They put their names on these letters. And if you go back and read the expose from the Wall Street Journal 2 Fridays ago, you'll quickly realize that anybody who steps out of this situation and starts to talk about how to really reform the system, they're punished. And so I just want to applaud and empathize with the actual providers of healthcare in this state who are actually doing the work of healthcare, who themselves are as frustrated about this as we are.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Do we have any other questions this morning for Treasurer Folwell? No? Okay. Oh, go ahead. Do we have one?
Yeah, just one quick question. If you allow me to pivot away to a more general topic. This is Alex Hager at WPTF. I just wanted to ask if there's any way that the federal government shutdown is affecting the operation of the state's finances.
It does affect that. Thank you, Alex. We just had our monthly state council of state meeting a moment ago, where the governor is the chair of that, and Charlie Peruse, who's the budget director for the governor, brought up the fact that it's starting to bite some of the areas of state government, and it's a terrific question, but it's a question better asked of him, since he has and also the controller. We're seeing evidence of it, mostly in the state health plan. We're not seeing much impact as far as the pension plan, the unclaimed property, the financial operations division, or the defined contribution plan. But we're seeing some small impacts. But I think that question is that issue just came up this morning on the Council of State meeting.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Treasurer Folwell for a few closing remarks.
Thank you all for joining us. And during my comments, if you feel like you have another question, you're just interrupt. But we appreciate your interest in these subjects. We have not changed. We're trying to figure out what's right, get it right, and keep it right. Over the next few months, you're going to see some numbers from the Treasurer's Office about the kinds of savings that we've had in the Treasurer's Office over the last 2 years, not just in the retirement division, but also in the state health plan. So when we're asking other people to live within their budget, we're also doing it here at the Treasurer's Office. And also want to remind you that today is our local government commission meeting. It's not something that's probably on a lot of your agendas, but there is an opportunity, I think, to call into the local government commission meeting. But when you start thinking about debt and the increase in interest rates and what's happening to the ability of not the state to borrow money, but all the counties, cities, water and sewer districts, Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte airports, school districts, Wake Forest University, private colleges. When you think about all that, a lot of that action is now and has been, since it's been formed, takes place in the local government commission. So it's not a subject that we talk about very often on the Ask Me Anything call, but when communities or enterprises don't have access to the debt market and don't have access to capital, that's not a good thing, and that's what the local government commission is in charge of. You can go to the website. There's an issue coming up at 2:00 today, where one entity's wanted to borrow $100 million, and then we have the full agenda at 2:30. So you can go to the Treasurer's website and pull up that issue.